Hello everyone and welcome. Joe Snow back here for another deck tech guide for my YouTube. This is going to be about the Dagon list that I've been playing. I just recently reached Grandmaster with, as you can see here. Before we get into looking at the actual deck, I just want to show you guys some of the results and get my face out of the way so you can see the list. So we're going to be going over the deck. Why I think it's good, why it's very different than other versions, and a little bit about how to play with the particular deck. As you can see, it's called Not Nova. This deck list, the main difference from the other Dagon lists that you're going to see running around is that it in fact is not running Siri Nova. And why is this? Well, Siri Nova is a powerful finisher, but the large majority of the games I was losing when I was playing the Nova version of the deck involved having too many dead Death Wish units, in particular the Rot Fiends. The Rot Fiends seemed very, very poor in the deck. They very seldomly got a ton of value. You had more Death Wishes than triggers, and oftentimes in round 3 I ended up just playing them as an 8, and it was costing me a lot of games. So I was racking my brain trying to figure out a way to fix the bronze package. Something like Reconnaissance sounds like it'd be a natural fit, but since we're playing Foglets and Slizzard, what effectively happens is there's too many dead hits for the Reconnaissance to actually be very good in this list. So you couldn't run that. What I eventually decided was if we cut the Nova, we don't have to play that package, and I've had a ton of success with the deck since then, just by solidifying our bronzes and only playing the good bronzes here. So let's get into a little bit of an overview about the deck, what it's doing, and then we'll go on a card-by-card analysis. The key thing to this deck, it's one of the few decks in the meta right now that's not looking to completely abuse the coin toss. The reason it is still able to be competitive while not abusing the coin toss like so many of the other decks is one main factor, that it's super well-rounded. What this deck lacks for in the ability to just throw raw points down and mess with the coin toss, it makes up in utility. I want you guys to think of this deck as a Swiss Army knife type of deal. It's prepared for every situation. It has single target removal. It has a good long round. It has a good short round. It's got ways to mess with the graveyard. It is very flexible at stopping your opponent's game plan. One of the most important questions I get with this deck is, do you want a long round 3? Do you want a short round 3? Well, the answer is a little more complex than that. This is a deck that's going to reward you knowing the matchups and knowing what your opponent wants. Since you're pretty much okay in any of those situations, obviously based on the context of your hand and stuff as well, if you're playing against a deck that wants a long round 3, you make it a short one. If they want a short round 3, you make it a long one, because you can play both sides of the court. You have game on both ends of this spectrum here. So it's super important not for you to execute your own game plan, but to try and mess with your opponent's game plan as efficiently as possible. I believe that to be the proper way to play this deck. So let's go over some of the cards and some of the interesting choices that you guys will see here. We'll start with the bronze package. As far as the bronze package, we have Larry the Arcspore and Dows. These are both 3-ofs. These are just the best Death Wish units. This one gives you a very good long round. It's an additional source of quote-unquote weather, basically. And then the Dow is just combined insanely well with Cyclopses and Griffins you have to go a little low tempo first, and then boom, big hit of tempo. Boom, big hit of tempo. They are quite good. So these were definitely the best, and getting to play 3 of these each instead of the 2 that you would have in the Nova versions of the deck, I think is quite important to the consistency and the overall power level of this deck. Then we come to the Griffins. Griffins are just simply the best Death Wish enabler. Sorry, guys. 9 strength. When you combine with the Dow, you're looking at a straight up 17 points, which is great. You're looking at 13, but it honestly averages out to like 11.5 or 12 if you wind up triggering it on an Arcspore, because you're not always hitting a 4. Sometimes you're hitting 1s, 2s, 3s, things like that. It's not what you're looking to do, but sometimes you can try an RNG to kill a 4-strength unit, like a Succubus, something crazy like that. In large part, you are trying to put this on the Dow. Cyclops, same type of deal, a little bit worse than the Griffin because it's a little bit more situational, but it does add more spot removal for removing things like Greatswords, things like Mangonel, things like Impera Enforcers, basically any engine piece, Dragoons, things like this. The Cyclops is great at that and gives this deck a whole new level of, another dimension of flexibility to it. You can also use it with some of the bigger units, like an Azrael that ate something large to deal with a Bork at the end of the game. which can be quite nice. Bork is Philanthropic Mirth, for those of you who are a little bit confused. Foglets, you could play one Foglet. I've been happier with the two right now because I do have two ways to make fog. There is definitely a case for cutting one of these Foglets and adding a Barbagazi back into the deck. I happen to think it's a little bit better with two Foglets, no Barbagazi, but I will admit that it's super close and something I consider oftentimes for a change. Slizzer's just great. Mid to late game, you're tacking an additional 2 points onto what you already want to be doing anyway. The card's awesome. It just fits really, really nicely in Death Wish because people will try and remove your Death Wish units so you can't proc it over and over again. You'll get them into the graveyard through other ways. It's just great. The Slizzard, you guys don't need me to tell you that Slizzard's a great card. So I would normally just get into the silver package, but I think it's important to talk about the golds first, just because of the way this plays out. So Ritual makes a lot of sense in a Death Wish deck, right? This should not be anything new to you guys here. A lot of times later in the game, in like a medium round 3, you bring back one Dow to trigger all your Griffins on, and another Larry, just for some nice damage over time. Sometimes you can get back double Larrys if you think it's going to go super long. You want to be careful not to get your 7 Scorch, though, particularly against Scoia'tael, as that can be a pretty big blowout play. But this card's just flexible, powerful. Sometimes I save it for round 3. Sometimes I play it round 1 if they're killing a lot of my dudes. It's just a overall very solid, very valuable gold to this type of strategy. Then we come to Muzzle. Why is Muzzle good right now, and why isn't this K-Ran? Muzzle is much better than K-Ran against things like Ronvid, particularly the new Krakon Crate Greatsword deck that's running around. You can fog their 10th Greatsword that they get off of their leader, which puts it perfectly into Muzzle range, and just steal that right out from underneath them. It's better against Dragoons. There are spots where it's worse, where you need raw tempo, like it's definitely worse against stuff like Mangonels and Enforcers, but Mangonels and Enforcers are largely on the decline, where I think all the other units that I mentioned first are increasing in popularity right now. So I think that Muzzle is just another, it helps you hit that critical mass of single target engine removal while also being so much more than that in some matchups. I've been very, very impressed with how it's playing. Caretaker is sort of the flex slot of this deck. You could make a case for Woodland Spirit here. You could play K-Ran here. There's a few different cards you could play. Once again, I love the versatility on this card. Our whole plan is to mess with your opponent, and Caretaker lets you do that. Sure, sometimes you steal a 20 strength Django Fett and you just go off, right? But that's not really what he's for. When you're playing against Consume, you steal their Necker Warrior to interrupt their Slizzard chain. You steal the Northern Realm player's Shani target after you've killed it because you have several ways to get it into the graveyard. Things like this, just more little tiny ways to poke holes in your opponent's game plan. If they're sitting there trying to craft this game plan, they're not ready for all the different angles you're going to try and come at it. And Caretaker is just a card that really excels at that, and sometimes is just raw value. For example, if you're playing Eridan, you can use a Cyclops to throw something at their Abaya. A lot of them play, and then you can steal it with Caretaker for Weather Clear. It's just so valuable in so many different spots, and it opens up lines of play that you would have never had available to you otherwise, because you're effectively playing with a whole new stack of cards. Love the Caretaker. That being said, he is a flex spot. You can certainly change him out for some of the other goals that I mentioned. Wisper's Tribute. This is the card that lets you not have to play Nova. This card is insane in so many dimensions right now. First of all, its primary use is that it can be used as a giant finisher with Monster Nest, right? When you Wisper's Tribute is 6, you Monster's Nest for a Ghoul, which makes 11. You eat a Spy at the end of the game. You're looking at 24 points there. That is bigger than Siri Nova as a finisher, so it has that dimension. It gives you a high-tempo way to put a Barbagazi on the board, Barbacoas as we call them here. That's another powerful ability. The other thing is Mandrake. Mandrake has been insane for me on my latest climb. Besides completely decimating the Alchemy deck, if they don't use John Calvate directly into Vesemir Mandrake or just regular Mandrake on it that exact turn, that's it. That's a wrap. Their Kahir is now dead, and Kahir is probably the single most powerful one-card finisher in the game. Mandrake is invaluable in that matchup. When you're playing against the Elves, and they have the Officer guy that lets you mulligan a card, boost by it. Nice little tempo swing there when you kill an 18 strength Officer and drop a 6 strength body on the board. It's a lot of points. I've used it to kill Irises without proccing their ability and turning off your opponent's Caretakers, things like that. This card is very, very powerful in the meta right now. Once in a while it will be dead, once in a while it will bite you in the ass, but it's very, very good. And the Wisp just having the tutor ability of it, so you have it much more often when you want it, and slapping an extra 6 points onto it just makes it all the more powerful. I would not cut either of these. They're both very good in their own right, and you do not want to run a card like this with only one target for it. You generally want 2 targets because we have Foglets and other things, Slizzards, that we might want to mulligan away, and you can't dedicate that much of your mulligan to this particular card. So, Frightener, it's a spy. Play it. I don't know, it's really good. You can weather it down in this deck, too. It's even better. Sweet. Movement's kind of cool. That's it. It's a spy. You should be playing it. Malorne. This is your best proactive play, and on Blue Coin, I very often open up Malorne into Larry the Arcspore, or Malorne into Dow, depending on the matchup, the situation, what I'm expecting out of them, and the context of my hand. You generally want access to both, because the Larrys are great damage over time, and the Dows are great procs for your Cyclopses and Griffins. So if I have 2 Larrys in my hand, oftentimes I'll Malorne into Dow. If I have 2 Dows in my hand, oftentimes I'll Malorne into Larry. And this is just a great proactive, get you on the board type of play, start the round. Something that this deck sorely needs, because you don't want to be playing naked Griffins, you don't want to be playing naked Cyclopses, you don't want to be throwing out a naked Fog without them having a unit in a row. It makes for a great turn 1 play. Azrael. Azrael's a card whose stock went up quite a bit since the patch. Obviously, it's amazing against the Greatsword decks. If you run into any of the older style Skellige decks that are running like Olgierd packages, if you can't Caretaker it, you can Azrael it. And it's very, very powerful. You know, it's a 15-point round 1 play that denies their carryover, mess with a lot of their leader. If they're running Ceres, there's even more implications there, because now they're going to have to work harder to get her into play. Very, very powerful. Eating the 13 Strength Spies, great. That's sort of its default mode, is an 18-point silver, which is not that much below Siri Nova. I've been very, very impressed with this card. Would not consider cutting it. And particularly in this version, since you cut the Nova, any large point finishers do have a bit of extra value, since you don't have that dimension to your deck with the Siri Nova. So he becomes even more important than normal. And we got good old Vader Maker. This is the reason you can get away with not running Woodland Spirit and running double Foglet. The large majority of the time you are using him for a second Fog. After a clear, or if you just get a really long round, you got to read on him that he's already used his mage, he doesn't have it, you don't think he's got the stones to create one. Ha ha ha. Yeah, and other than that, he is flexible, once again. Another way to remove that annoying Mangonel turn 1, just getting those engine units off the board. A lot of times in concert with a Boat Ping or something else, you can even kill the 10 Strength Greatsword. He kills regular Greatsword by himself. Having Alzur's Thunder plus Summon Foglet Fog split card is just very, very good. It's the exact type of tool and flexibility that this deck is looking for. So that's pretty much a little description of how the deck plays and why it's been performing so well for me. One other thing I would like to address is how to mulligan properly with this deck. Obviously, you don't want Foglets in your hand, but you want to make sure, and this skill will come with time, that you're really lining up how many Death Wish units you have versus how many Death Wish triggers you have. Your hand doesn't do anything if you have 2 Cyclopses and a Griffin, but no Death Wish units. And your hand's not putting out a lot of points if you've got 3 Dows and Arcaspore and no Cyclops or no Griffin. So basically, after you get rid of the Foglet, that's one of the main priorities you want to work on. Slizzard is also a card that in most matchups you don't want in your hand in round 1. You want to draw into it later. Sometimes you will play against these removal heavy decks, Alchemy, things like that, where the Slizzard can actually be pretty effective round 1. Most people tend to like to try and get my Death Wish units off the board, so Slizzard is much more reasonable of a card to think about keeping when you're playing against Alchemy. Yeah, so that is the deck. I've been having a ton of success with it. Really, really like it. It feels so much smoother than the Siri Nova version. I hope you guys enjoy the deck. If you liked the video, hit comment, subscribe. Costs you nothing. Helps me out a lot. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Kick some ass out there, and have a good one.